Hey, it's Soul, bringing you the World of Warcraft, and I'm a Paladin tank, and you might be too, or you might be interested in one because that's why you're watching this video. Today I'm going to provide you guys a guide, kind of an overview of all the different skills and talents and artifact things and legendary stuff, pretty much everything that there is to know about Paladins, at least on a very surface level. I've been tanking as a Paladin for 9 years, but more importantly I've been tanking as a prot Paladin now, during Legion. So I should have a pretty good perspective of what's going down. As a tanking class, Paladins are kind of in an interesting spot. These days they kind of live on the edge. They skirt the line between scaring your healers and really boring them with how little damage you take. I think they do pretty decent damage, and they have some interesting skills to use on enemies, on allies, and on themselves. I have to admit that sometimes tanking can be a kind of a boring job, so you can spice things up depending on your talent loadout, and how you feel like playing your Paladin tank overall. So let's get right to it. The way I see it, Paladins are all about utility. There's a lot of things that they can do, of course, for themselves to improve their game, but more importantly, they do a lot to support their group. With their blessings, their healing abilities, and the utilities that they have to protect their party, for me that kind of fits my gameplay style and I guess my class fantasy too when it comes to my enjoyment. We'll start off with rotation abilities, or the buttons that you're going to be mashing most of the time. We have Hammer of the Righteous, Shield of the Righteous, Judgement, Consecrate, Light of the Protector, and Avenger Shield. The first skill to really point out is Consecrate. It's not just a cool little dot or a cool sounding ability, think of it like your safe zone. While inside your Consecrate, you have a buff to your Shield of the Righteous, which is your active mitigation ability, as well as your Light of the Protector, which is your self-healing or external healing ability. With a maxed out artifact, your Consecrate is going to last for 10 seconds, but it has a cooldown for a little bit less than that. So it is possible for you to overlap your Consecrate. Now it doesn't give you like a double dip buff, but it does give you more freedom to move around. And it's going to be very important that you time where you lay down your Consecrate. You don't want to put yourself outside of that safe zone and otherwise take extra damage when you don't have to. Shield of the Righteous is your active mitigation ability, so naturally it is the centerpiece of your ability to stay alive. The ability has 3 charges, and every time you smash someone in the face with this ability, you get 4.5 seconds of your active mitigation ability. Which, depending on your stats, and if you're standing in your Consecrate, again, make sure you're standing in your Consecrate, you're going to take 50% damage from any source, which is huge. So scary, in fact, that when your active mitigation isn't available, you're going to get hit like a truck, or at least you fear that you will, and that's a good thing. The rule of thumb for Shield of the Righteous is that you don't want to have 3 charges, you're kind of wasting charges in that case. Unless you're totally outgearing content though, you also don't want to have 0 charges either. Proper education on the fights will mean that you know exactly how many charges you want to have available, which again is at least 1. So that way when some crazy damaging ability is going to come, you'll be prepared for it. Most theory crafters and far better tanks than I will tell you that high uptime on Shield of the Righteous, or your active mitigation ability, is crucial to staying alive and basically being a good tank. I mostly agree with that because taking less damage more often is a very good thing. At the same time, proper encounter handling and communication with your healers is going to go a long way too. As well as of course popping your other cooldowns, which we'll get to later. But to reiterate regarding your active mitigation, you want to do your best to have 100% uptime on it when it counts. So that's going to be times when you're taking high amounts of damage from boss abilities, or if you're taking numerous adds that aren't being crowd controlled. Now to help a little bit with that Shield of the Righteous uptime is Judgement, which is the one skill that you pretty much always want to have on cooldown. Judgement will always reduce the charge time of Shield of the Righteous by 2 seconds, and if it crits, it's going to reduce it by 4 seconds. It also hits pretty hard, so it's great for pulling in case your taunt and your Avenger Shield is on cooldown. Speaking of Avenger Shield, it's a really unique and really awesome ability that Paladins have. It silences the first enemy that it hits, and for all the damage that it puts out, a small percentage of that will become a bubble, and that's according to the Bulwark of Order artifact trait that we have. The bubble that Bulwark of Order gives you is pretty small, it's not super reliable, but it does help to damage smooth. And by damage smoothing, it does save your healers quite a bit of mana over a long fight. But in an emergency situation, it's not really something you can count on at all. You'll want to use defensive cooldowns, kiting, studying, or anything like that to help keep you alive, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Light of the Protector is our self-heal, and it's pretty interesting on how it operates. With a maxed out artifact, it heals for almost 40% of our missing life. As soon as you get the Light of the Titans artifact trait, it's also going to offer kind of pitiful, but kind of an okay healing over time to help top us off. This is kind of what I mean about a tank paladin living on the edge. It kind of scares healers if they're not familiar with healing this kind of tank. This means that most of the time paladins are not going to be sitting pretty at full health. Instead, you're going to be kind of spiky, kind of not, because you don't want to use this ability if you have full health, maybe if you just want to have the heal over time running. But you probably don't want to heal yourself unless you're a little bit under half of your life. Thankfully, there's an artifact trait called Faith's Armor that will increase your armor by 30% when you're under 40% of your life. This acts as a buffer to prevent you from totally getting gibbed, and it gives you time to cast Light of the Protector and get yourself back up. So typically when you're riding these low health situations, you want to pop your Shield of the Righteous to prevent any extra incoming damage from hitting you, and then hit Light of the Protector to get yourself back up. Keep in mind that both your self-heal and your active mitigation ability is off the global cooldown, so the only thing you would have to worry about is if you have those abilities available. Finally, we have Hammer of the Righteous, which is our basic attack, and just like your Shield of the Righteous, you don't want to sit on the maximum amount of charges, which is 2. Keep in mind that using Hammer of the Righteous while you're standing in your Consecrate creates an AoE attack, which is kinda nice, but you should be standing in your Consecrate pretty much at all times anyway. As an alternative, you can spec for Blessed Hammer, a very different ability and what I hope to be a very iconic and permanent mainstay in the Pally arsenal. Each Blessed Hammer you throw out hits targets twice, and each time they're hit, they get a debuff where their next auto attack will hit for 12% less damage. So for multiple targets or slow, hard-hitting ones, it's a very powerful debuff. So while there is kind of a rotation on these abilities, I take this more as a priority on when to use these skills. On any given pull, I'll usually kick it off with an Avenger shield followed by a Judgement. I'll throw down a Consecrate, and by the time the target gets to me, I'll smash him in the face with my shield to get an initial buff. This is to help smooth out the initial damage in case my healer fell asleep or something. If I'm a spec for Blessed Hammer though, I'll throw down a Consecrate and then throw out 1 or 2 Blessed Hammers, and by the time the target does hit me, then I'll hit him in the face with my shield. After a few seconds, my Judgement should be on cooldown, and I'll throw that every time so I can get my charges of Shield of the Righteous back up. From there, I maintain my charges where I need to, keep other abilities off cooldown if I need to, and if I need to make a big move, I make sure that once I go to my next destination, I lay down my Consecrate right away, and then resume tanking. Again, as Paladins, we have really strong utility cooldowns to assist our team. Of course, we have the basic stuff. We have a Taunt, we have an Interrupt, and unlike some of the other tanks, we can cleanse poisons. We have a 1-minute stun, but with the Fist of Justice talent, our Judgment ability reduces the cooldown by 10 seconds. What that pretty much means is that 1-minute stun can potentially go down to about 20 or so seconds. Divine Steed is a new ability that we have in Legion that makes us go super fast. It's really good for a high movement fight where we need to zip across and plant ourselves down somewhere, then we throw down a Consecrate and boom, we're ready to tank again. Our blessings though are what define us as Paladins and Paladin tanks when it comes to protecting our party. Blessing of Freedom is a short cooldown that can free anybody or ourselves from enemy crowd control effects. Blessing of Sacrifice is great if you're also tanking with someone else and they happen to be taking extra damage. Now that person has an extra cooldown to rely on as long as you use it on them. Blessing of Protection offers full physical immunity to your target. You can use this on healers, casters, or melee, as it no longer prevents melee attackers from attacking. Blessings allow paladins to nearly negate mechanics or even cheese them. Attacks that tanks should be avoiding that could otherwise kill them can be kind of shrugged off. Keep in mind that using Blessing of Protection along with Divine Shield or Lay on Hands will cause forbearance on the target, preventing either spell from being cast on them for 30 seconds. And of course we have really strong defensive cooldowns to keep us alive, to get us back to full health, or again to cheese some mechanics. Lay on Hands has been a mainstay since Classic WoW and will take us to full life. Avenging Wrath is both an offensive and defensive cooldown, as it increases both our damage and healing done. Guardian of Ancient Kings allows us to take only half the damage, and coupling that with our Shield of the Righteous, well, we're pretty much the Terminator. With Divine Shield, we're even better than the Terminator, and we'll take no damage from anything. Finally, we have an interesting skill with Ardent Defender. Aside from taking less damage, a hit that would otherwise kill us will instead heal us for a certain amount. This is cool for cases where we otherwise might die from a single ability, and we have the foresight to pop the ability beforehand. Think of Odin's Spear in the Trial of Valor. Instead of having to run away little girl, we can just kind of stand there, continue helping dish out damage, And from there, when the spear is thrown, we're taken down to 12% health instead of outright dying. From there, we just pop our Hand of the Protector or Light of the Protector, and we're in a pretty good spot. Our artifact is called Truth Guard, which is kind of a boring artifact. It doesn't have any super outstanding or awesome traits, at least in my opinion. I kind of brushed on them a little bit earlier in the video, but I'll go over the major traits. First off, we have the signature ability, the Eye of Tyr. It's interesting because while it's more of a defensive cooldown, we have to hit enemies with it in order to get the defensive benefit. It's a 25% damage reduction and it lasts for 9 seconds. Typically, you want to use it every time it's off the cooldown. Sometimes I'll save it for just a few seconds, just in case my Shield of the Righteous charges aren't up. Bulwark of Order provides a cute little damage reduction based on how much damage you did with your Avenger shield. It's not a lot, but it does help smooth out some of the damage that's coming. Tyr's Enforcer basically gives you an explosive shield. And unless it's changed, the damage from Tyr's Enforcer will also apply Bulwark of the Order. Again, it's not that much, but it is kinda nice when you have a big group of mobs. You throw your shield and you get a nice bubble and some decent damage output. Light of the Titans also provides a small healing over time whenever you use Light of the Protector on yourself or on others. It's not a lot, but it does turn out to be a decent amount of healing over the course of a longer fight. Two lesser traits that I'll point out are Faith's Armor and Painful Truths. Faith's Armor makes us harder to kill when we have lower health, which again kind of defines our whole living on the edge paradigm. Painful Truths causes your Ardent Defender to deal damage whenever you're being hit, while the skill is active. The damage is pretty pitiful, but if you're taking a bunch of melee adds, it'll provide a nice little bit of burst damage. Alright, let's try to zip through talents really quick. First off, we have Holy Shield, which will increase our block chance, it'll let us block magic, and it'll make our blocks do damage. In my opinion, while blocking stuff is nice, effective use of our active mitigation is even better. So I guess as a personal flavor of mine, I prefer Blessed Hammer. It does a lot more damage and it allows for some interesting gameplay. It does make kiting mobs kind of easy when I can just kind of run around and throw hammers and move mobs into the hammers. When mobs or targets to get hit, they get that melee damage debuff and it lasts for 10 seconds. I think Holy Shield would be good for instances when you're dealing with a fast hitting enemy. Enemies that can hit faster than what Blessed Hammer can debuff more can probably be mitigated better by Holy Shield. And Consecrated Hammer just sucks. It's not really worth picking up right now. The second row has some pretty interesting choices. First Avenger is the one that I default with. Most of the time encounters are with a single enemy. Keep in mind that the extra shield damage is going to translate into Bulwark of the Order bubbles. Bastion of Light is a really powerful cooldown that will replenish all of our Shield of the Righteous charges instantly. This gives you the opportunity to have your active mitigation up for nearly a minute. What you do is expend all your shield charges, pop Bastion of Light, expend those charges as well, and you'll be sitting pretty taking a lot less damage for an extended period of time. Of course that's not practical. What you ideally want to use it for is kind of as an emergency cooldown, if you happen to be taking extended amounts of damage and you happen to run out of charges. For the most part, and I know I keep repeating myself, but the most important thing is that you want to have 100% uptime on your active mitigation when it's most important. Crusader's Judgement will give 2 charges to your Judgement, and it gives a chance to replenish your Judgement whenever you avoid a melee attack or use your Hammer of the Righteous / Blessed Hammer. The problem though, at least for me, is that it does weird things with the priority rotation. Having more Judgments is nice because that replenishes our Shield of the Righteous a little bit faster, but that takes up a global cooldown that I'd want to spend on Consecrate, Avenger Shield, or my Hammer of the Righteous. It's fun to experiment with. I even tried out an all-crit build to see if I would get any benefit. In the end though, maybe it just doesn't feel right to me, but I don't recommend this talent. The third talent row is mostly about crowd control, and for the most part I'll usually go with Blinding Light first. Mostly because it does damage, but it does offer some good utility. Whenever you're in situations where you run into multiple casters, you don't have a whole lot of options. As a Blood-Out Paladin, I can pop my Arcane Torrent. Torrent can use War Stomp, and you can use Blinding Light. If not to stun, you can at least interrupt casts. Repentance isn't all that great except for maybe in Keystone Dungeons if you want to try and sneak past a couple of mobs. You can put these guys to bed, but for the most part, especially in Keystone Dungeons or in places where you can, you'd want to go Fist of Justice. Having a 6-second stun on a 20-second cooldown is a huge benefit for your team. The next row is a funny row that I call, hey, do you want Blessing of Spell Warding or not? Blessing of Spell Warding replaces Blessing of Protection and it brings the cooldown from 5 minutes to 3 minutes. This offers non-physical damage immunity, so you can cheese certain fights and encounters this way too. If you use it on yourself, since you're not immune to physical damage, you're not going to drop aggro either. Otherwise, if you don't have that talent, you're more than likely going to pick up Cavalier, which will give your Divine Steed 2 charges, simple as that. Red Aura just sucks, it doesn't do a whole lot of damage at all. Enemies should be standing in your Consecrate anyway, and that does a heck of a lot more damage. Thankfully, the next row is a bit more interesting. Hand of the Protector is probably the default talent that you'll go for. In fact, I'm pretty sure that I said Hand of the Protector over Light of the Protector somewhere in this video because I use it so much. It does two awesome things. For one, it reduces the cooldown of this ability by 4 seconds. The other is that it lets you use this on other people. So this is great if you're in a double tank situation and your co-tank is getting wrecked, you can pop this skill on them and it'll heal for an extreme amount of life. Since other tanks tend to have a significantly larger health pool than paladins, the occasional use of the skill will probably surprise your healers. Knight Templar is another interesting talent that does two things. It makes the cooldown on Divine Steed drop down to a little over 20 seconds, and it turns that skill into a damage reduction cooldown. The unfortunate thing about it is that Divine Steed isn't off of the global cooldown, and this talent doesn't change that. So it's going to be a little bit less reliable in emergency situations, but if you plan for it, it's going to be a pretty good talent. Finally, we have Final Stand, which in my opinion is a bit too situational. It affects a skill that you only use every 5 minutes, and it taunts everything, so I can't see much use of this aside from maybe in a Keystone dungeon where things really hit the fan and you've got to try to live a little bit longer so your healer can get you back up. The next row is full of situational talents, but there's probably one that you'll lean away from, and that's Aegis of Light. It's the only talent in the row that offers a straight up defensive cooldown, but it's very limited in what it can do. The fact that the range is limited to 10 yards behind you, as well as that you have to channel it for 6 full seconds to get the full effect, makes it pretty limited in scope, despite that you get a raid cooldown out of it. On the other hand, Consecrated Ground and Judgement of Light are pretty easy to use. Consecrated Ground is useful not for the heal, but for the snare. This makes it really good for boss encounters with plenty of ads or dungeons. Judgement of Light is probably going to be your go-to for the easy, passive raid utility, and of course it works on dungeons and in solo contents as well. And now the last row. Righteous Protector in my opinion gives the most versatility when it comes to progression. Righteous Protector causes your Shield of the Righteous to reduce the cooldown of your Light of the Protector or Hand of the Protector, as well as your Avenging Wrath by a few seconds. This creates an interesting rotation where your Judgment influences your Shield of the Righteous, which influences your self-heal as well as one of your cooldowns. Overall, in my opinion, this gives you a higher uptime on keeping your ass alive. Seraphim is kind of the opposite of that. It'll use 2 charges of your Shield of the Righteous to give you what is mostly an offensive cooldown. It is powerful, but something that I'd recommend more for farm content than progression. Especially when you and your team are learning fights and trying to figure out the best way to mitigate damage, it might not be the best idea to sacrifice 2 of your charges for the sake of doing a little bit more damage, since, that's your DPS's job. Ultimately though, it's going to come down to communication between you and your healers. How do you want to plan this? If your healers are fine with you going with Seraphim, hey, by all means. And as a fitting end, we're at Last Defender. I kinda see this talent kind of like having Vengeance back in Mist of Pandaria. It doesn't have so much to do with damage that you're taking, but more mobs that are within 8 yards of you. And for each one that's around you, and of course you start with 1, which is your primary target, it reduces the damage you take and increases the damage you deal by 3% per mob, with of course diminishing returns. Depending on the encounter, this can be a little bit interesting. This will basically encourage mob stacking whenever possible. Like if your co-tank was holding onto mobs and you're holding onto the boss, you'd probably get a nice bump in performance. By itself though, Last Defender applies itself as a heal. You'll be able to see on damage meters just how much damage Last Defender got from you. So if nothing else, you can think of it maybe not so much as vengeance, but more like free versatility. So I'll go ahead and talk about legendaries now, and we'll start with the ones that I'm using, which includes the Prida's Tank Bubbleneck and Uther's Guard. The tanking neck after 715 is still really good. Getting the bubble every 30 seconds guaranteed is pretty much effective healing on us at all times, so this is great for pretty much any kind of content. Uther's Guard does a nice little heal, but more importantly it makes your blessings last 50% longer. It might not obviously sound great or make you feel awesome, but it'll definitely make your other tank feel awesome when they have a 30% damage reduction for 18 seconds. Now let's check out the legendaries that I'd love to have. At the top of the list, without a doubt, is Sauron's Resolve. This will give me an extra charge of Light of the Protector, and in my opinion, it'll damn near break the game for me. Like I said, we live and die in a kind of narrow space of low health. Having control of that space makes us a much more effective tank. Having this helmet will give us a lot more flexibility to heal ourselves or even to heal others. Having what's effectively a much shorter cooldown, I could probably spec out of Hand of the Protector if I'm just healing myself, and go for either Knights Templar or Final Stand. On top of that, if reducing the cooldown on Avenging Wrath isn't very important for me, I might even spec out of Righteous Protector and go for Last Defender if I wanted to. For me, Heathcliff's Immortality would be another really good find. An extra 4% damage reduction while I'm in my Consecrate effectively means I'm always going to have 4% damage reduction. To get similar damage reduction through, say, Versatility, I'll need 4,000 of that in order to get it. The breastplate and the Tyleka, whatever, those pants, at first seem to be pretty good. Like, they have a great synergy with Avenger Shield. It'll hit more targets, and it will in fact reduce the cooldown of your Guardian of the Ancient Kings for every target hit. The problem though is that the pants don't do much at all if you're not fighting multiple targets in a very consistent basis. And otherwise, the breastplate doesn't give a significant enough cooldown, especially when you consider you're usually fighting a single target as a boss. However, for things like Keystone Dungeons, I think that rocking this set, you'll be an absolute monster, being able to pop one of your biggest, heaviest cooldowns in more than half the time. Finally, we get to the last 4 legendaries, which they are good in their own right, but at least for me, they're not as useful. The Chain of Thrain, or at least I'm gonna rhyme it that way, is dependent on the cooldown for Avenging Wrath. And while having the extra damage and healing is good, I feel like I'm better off with the passive healing of the tanking neck, or the super awesome healing of the helmet. Agrimar's Stride does seem pretty good for movement-heavy fights, but again, it just doesn't seem to offer as good of a benefit as some of the previously mentioned legendaries. Cephas's Secret is nicer than it was before, but just not quite nice enough, and I'm pretty underwhelmed by the new Archimon trinket. If anything, it does give better control than the neck. But I don't think I'm ready to make the switch over until I take a really good look at the new trinkets in the Nighthold and kind of decide for myself, hey, what would I rather have? If there are 2 nice Nighthold trinkets to have, or if I happen to get a really awesome Titan Forged one elsewhere, then I'd stick with the neck. If not, then this trinket might be useful for putting out some extra damage whenever possible. So that's the basic tanking guide for prot paladins in 7.15. And hopefully this was useful for you folks, and whether it was or not, I'd love to get your guys' feedback. I do plan on doing some more tanking videos and answering questions and things like that. And the next one, I might go a little bit more in depth with best practices, or like how to gear and how to stat, and some of the experiments that I've done. As always, if you enjoyed yourself, please hit the like button, and if you want to keep supporting me and my channel, please hit the subscribe button and check out my other stuff. I'll see you folks in game, and otherwise have a good one. I'm Soul. Stay breezy, guys.